Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into the concept of liberty. But get this, it's not as simple as it sounds. It turns out there were actually two distinct types of liberty. And really understanding that difference can change how you see a lot of things in the world.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So we're going to be exploring excerpts from a lecture by Grant Madsen, and he breaks down Isaiah Berlin's famous work on this very topic.
Oh, Berlin's work on the two concepts of liberty. Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
It really makes you realize how often we use that word liberty, without really grasping the nuances.
Right.
It's kind of like we talk about art, You say art, well, it's a very broad term, right?
Yeah.
We know that a stunning Renaissance masterpiece and a child's finger painting both fall under that category of art, but they're vastly different things.
Yeah.
Liberty is similar in a lot of ways. You have these different flavors of liberty that impact everything from our personal choices to global politics.
Okay, so let's break down these flavors of liberty. Madsen lays out two main types: negative liberty and positive liberty.
Right.
Can you tell me more about negative liberty?
Sure. So negative liberty at its core is freedom from external constraints. So that means it's about the absence of barriers or interference that would prevent you from doing what you want.
Okay.
Imagine a world without walls or fences or anyone telling you no.
Okay.
That's the essence of negative liberty.
So it's about removing obstacles, clearing the path so that individuals can act as they see fit.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense, but I'm guessing there's a little more to it than that.
Absolutely. Think about, for example, the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution.
Right.
It guarantees freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly.
Right.
It's not about the government giving you the ability to speak or to worship. It's about the government refraining from interfering with those rights.
Okay.
So that's negative liberty in action, a hands-off approach to ensuring freedom.
That's a really good example. So then how does positive liberty differ from this hands-off approach?
Well, positive liberty gets into a little more complex territory. It's not simply about removing those external barriers. It's about the capacity to act on your will and achieve your full potential.
Okay.
It's the freedom to rather than freedom from.
Got it.
One way to think about it is that negative liberty asks, what am I prevented from doing?
Okay.
While positive liberty asks, what am I capable of becoming?
Oh, that's an interesting distinction. So it's not just about being left alone. It's about having the tools and the resources to actually make choices and shape your own life.
Precisely. And it's often tied to ideas of self-mastery or self-realization.
Right.
Madsen uses the example of somebody who is struggling with addiction.
Okay.
So they might technically be free to use drugs.
Right. From a negative liberty standpoint.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. But their addiction prevents them from really acting in accordance with their deeper desires, their values, their positive liberty. Their true potential is stifled by internal constraints, not external ones.
That's a really powerful example. It really highlights that sort of internal dimension of positive liberty. The idea that freedom isn't just about external circumstances, but also about our internal capacity to act freely.
Exactly. It's about agency, self-determination, the ability to, kind of author your own life narrative.
So we've got these two distinct types of liberty. Negative liberty, that freedom from interference, and positive liberty, the freedom to act and to flourish. Now I'm starting to see how these two concepts could clash. Where do we see that tension play out in the real world?
Oh, I think the examples are everywhere once you start looking for them. One classic example is public education. On the one hand, mandatory schooling restricts negative liberty you are required to attend. But proponents argue that it enhances positive liberty by equipping individuals with the knowledge and the skills they need for a brighter future.
So it's a trade-off, right? Restricting one type of liberty in the name of promoting another. And this tension isn't new, is it? Madsen mentions that even great thinkers throughout history have grappled with these very concepts.
He does, yeah. Madsen points to figures like Hobbes, Mill, and Kant, all wrestling with these complexities of liberty. And what's striking is how relevant that debate remains today. We're still grappling with these fundamental questions in areas like, social media regulation, public health mandates, even personal choices regarding health and lifestyle.
I see what you mean. For example, are we truly free to make unhealthy choices if they ultimately harm our well-being? Or are some restrictions necessary to safeguard our long-term freedom to live healthy lives?
It's a question with no easy answers, and different societies and individuals will draw the line differently.
Yeah.
But I think by understanding these two types of liberty, we can at least engage in more nuanced and informed discussions about these crucial issues.
That's a great point. It's not about finding a one-size-fits-all answer. It's about understanding the complexities and the trade-offs involved. But let's get into some specific criticisms of these concepts. Are there any inherent flaws or potential downsides to focusing too heavily on either negative or positive liberty?
Oh, you're spot on. There are definitely potential pitfalls to consider with both. Let's start with negative liberty. One critique is that a solely hands-off approach can create this sort of survival of the fittest dynamic,
Right.
where if we're only focused on removing those external barriers, we might be neglecting those internal ones that prevent people from truly exercising their freedom.
So it's like giving everyone a car, but not ensuring they have roads to drive on or the money
Yeah.
to pay for the gas.
Exactly.
They're technically free to drive, but is it really freedom if it's not practically attainable?
Precisely. Someone lacking education, resources, opportunities, they might be free from that direct interference, but still face significant hurdles in actually, pursuing their goals. It's like having a right to vote, but no access to information about the candidates or the issues at stake.
Right.
Is that true freedom?
Yeah, it makes you wonder if sometimes external support is actually needed to truly unlock that potential for self-direction,
Yeah.
the positive liberty champions.
Yeah, that is a core argument for positive liberty, but it's not without its own critiques. One concern is that defining freedom as reaching one's true potential can become a very, very slippery slope.
Yeah.
I mean, who gets to decide what that potential is?
That's a huge point. Because if we're not careful, positive liberty could be used to justify all sorts of paternalistic policies.
Right.
With, authorities deciding what's best for people, even if it goes against their individual desires.
Exactly. Imagine a government saying, we know what will make you truly happy and fulfilled, so we're going to structure society to nudge you in that direction, whether you like it or not.
Wow.
That's kind of a misuse of positive liberty,
Right.
straying into controlling territory.
So it's about striking a balance. Okay?
Yeah.
Enough support to empower individuals, but not so much control that it stifles their autonomy. It's a tightrope walk.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And it's a conversation that's been going on for centuries with no easy answers. But I think even acknowledging that tension between those two types of liberty helps us have more productive discussions about, everything from healthcare to education policy.
Yeah, absolutely. Madsen does a great job of bringing this to life with some real-world scenarios.
Yeah, he does.
What were some of the specific examples that he used to kind of illustrate this tension?
One that stood out to me was his discussion of public health initiatives like mandatory vaccinations.
Right.
So from a negative liberty perspective, some people might see vaccine mandates as government overreach, infringing on an individual's right to make their own medical choices.
It's that classic my body, my choice argument, right?
Yeah.
But I'm guessing there's a counterpoint
Yeah.
from the positive liberty side.
Oh, there is, yeah. Supporters of vaccine mandates, they often argue that widespread vaccination is essential for public health, protecting vulnerable populations and ultimately enabling people to live healthier, freer lives.
Right.
It's a case where restricting individual choice in the short term might actually enhance collective well-being
Right.
and ultimately individual freedom in the long term.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of how tricky this balance can be, because you've got these compelling arguments on both sides. Did Madsen offer any other examples where this tension kind of plays out?
He did. He talked about economic policies, specifically social safety net programs like welfare or universal basic income.
Okay.
And supporters often frame those as crucial for positive liberty. They argue that by providing that basic level of economic security, it allows people to pursue education, job training, maybe even start their own businesses. It's about leveling the playing field,
Right.
giving everyone that opportunity to reach their full potential.
So it's not just about handouts. It's about empowering people to take control of their lives and pursue their goals. But what about the arguments against such programs? Where does negative liberty come into play there?
Well, critics often argue that these programs involve, excessive government intervention in the economy, potentially stifling individual initiative and self-reliance. They might argue that taxing higher earners to fund these programs, it infringes on their negative liberty,
Oh,
their freedom to use their income as they see fit.
It's like two sides of the same coin, isn't it?
Yeah.
On one hand, you've got the argument for creating the conditions for individual flourishing, and on the other, that concern about overstepping boundaries and potentially creating unintended consequences.
Absolutely. And this tension is not limited to public policy. It shows up in our personal lives, too.
Okay.
Think about the choice to pursue, a very demanding career path. It might require long hours, sacrifices in the short term, potentially limiting your freedom to enjoy, leisure activities or spend time with loved ones. But in the long term, it could lead to greater financial security, professional fulfillment, ultimately more freedom to live life on your own terms.
It's a constant balancing act, isn't it? Weighing short-term constraints against long-term gains. Individual desires against collective needs.
Precisely. And Madsen emphasizes there's no one-size-fits-all answer. What constitutes the right balance between negative and positive liberty will vary depending on the context, the values at stake, the potential consequences.
It sounds like we need to develop our own, liberty compass and constantly recalibrate it as we navigate different situations and make choices that align with our values.
I love that analogy, a liberty compass,
Yeah.
guiding us through the complex terrain of freedom. And I think part of developing that compass is understanding not just the definitions of negative and positive liberty, but also their potential pitfalls.
Yeah. That's a great point. We've talked about how positive liberty can be misused to justify paternalistic policies. But what about negative liberty? Are there any dangers in taking that approach too far?
There are. One of the biggest criticisms of an exclusively negative conception of liberty is that it can lead to a society where the most powerful or privileged individuals thrive, while others are left to fend for themselves.
It's like that saying, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
Right.
A system where freedom is really only meaningful for those with the resources to exercise it.
Exactly. Critics argue that focusing solely on removing those external constraints, it neglects the reality that not everyone starts from the same place.
Right.
Some people might need additional support or opportunities to truly exercise their freedom.
So while negative liberty is essential for protecting individual autonomy, it's not enough on its own. We also need to consider how to create a more level playing field.
Right.
Where everyone has a genuine opportunity to pursue their goals and aspirations.
You got it. And that's where the concept of positive liberty comes back into play. It's not about dictating what people should do with their lives, but about ensuring they have the tools and resources to make meaningful choices.
Okay. I'm starting to see how these two types of liberty, while seemingly in tension, can actually complement each other.
That's a key insight. It's not an either situation. It's about finding ways to integrate both negative and positive liberty in a way that promotes both individual freedom and collective well-being.
So it's not just about choosing a side. It's about finding that sweet spot, that balance point, where individual autonomy and societal support work together kind of harmoniously. Madsen mentions that even Isaiah Berlin, a staunch defender of negative liberty, recognized the importance of this balance, didn't he?
He did, yeah. Berlin argued that while negative liberty was paramount, it was not enough to create a truly just and flourishing society. He acknowledged the need for some degree of positive liberty, particularly in terms of providing basic necessities and opportunities for all citizens.
It sounds like he understood that true freedom requires both the absence of constraints and the presence of certain conditions that allow individuals to thrive.
Precisely. And it's a reminder that even the most brilliant minds wrestle with these complex issues. There's no easy formula for striking that perfect balance between negative and positive liberty.
This whole conversation has been incredibly enlightening, but I have to ask, how do we even begin to apply these concepts in our own lives?
Yeah.
How can we use this understanding of negative and positive liberty to make better choices, engage in more productive conversations, and maybe even contribute to creating a more just and fulfilling world?
Yeah, it feels like we've almost been handed this incredible toolkit.
Right.
But knowing which tools to use and when is the real challenge.
Exactly. So where do we even start with this? Madsen poses this really thought-provoking question at the end here. Imagine you're building a society from scratch. How would you balance these two types of liberty to create a truly just and fulfilling environment for everyone?
I mean, that question really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, it's the ultimate test of our understanding.
It is. It's like being handed a blank canvas and told, okay, paint your ideal society, but make sure everyone's truly free.
Right.
Where would we even begin?
Well, I think a good starting point is recognizing that a truly flourishing society needs both.
Okay.
It needs both types of liberty. It's not about picking one over the other. It's about how to integrate them effectively.
Okay. So no Liberty Olympics where one side wins.
Yeah.
It's more about recognizing that they're both essential ingredients in the recipe for a thriving society.
Right.
But how do we actually strike that balance?
I think that's where things get really, really tricky. And as we've said many times, there is no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
But I think a crucial first step is enshrining certain fundamental negative liberties.
Okay.
Things like, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. These are cornerstones of individual autonomy.
So it's about setting those boundaries, those no-go zones, where the government can't infringe on individual rights. But as we've discussed, just having those freedoms on paper isn't always enough.
Exactly. That's where positive liberty comes in.
Yeah.
If we truly want a just and fulfilling society, we also need to ensure that everyone has access to the resources and opportunities that allow them to exercise that freedom meaningfully.
So things like, quality education, accessible health care,
Right.
economic opportunities that allow people to provide for themselves and their families. These aren't just nice to haves, they're essential for people to truly reach their full potential.
Absolutely. It's about creating a society where everyone, regardless of their background, regardless of their circumstances, they have a genuine chance to thrive.
But that probably requires some really tough decisions, right?
Yeah.
Like redistributing resources, creating social safety nets. Those things often spark huge debates about whether they're stepping on the toes of negative liberty.
Oh, you've hit on such a core tension. How do we provide those positive supports without unduly infringing on individual freedom? It's such a balancing act. And again, different societies are going to approach it in different ways.
Is there a way to think about this that doesn't make it an all or nothing proposition?
Mm-hmm.
Because it feels like sometimes the conversation gets stuck in these extremes.
Yeah.
You're either for total individual freedom with no safety net, or you're for this highly structured system that guarantees certain outcomes.
That's a great observation, and I think it highlights the importance of nuance
Right.
and a willingness to consider all these different perspectives. It's not about choosing a side. It's about finding that sweet spot where individual autonomy and collective well-being, they reinforce each other.
So maybe it's about exploring, innovative solutions like progressive taxation systems that ensure everyone contributes fairly, or investing in social safety net programs that provide a basic level of security without creating dependency.
Those are great examples, and I think it also requires, in a lot of ways, a shift in mindset from viewing liberty as this zero-sum game to recognizing that individual freedom and societal well-being, they're deeply interconnected.
It's that idea that we're all in this together, right? My freedom is enhanced when those around me also have the opportunity to thrive.
Exactly. A society where everyone's just struggling to survive isn't truly free, even if there's minimal government interference.
Right.
And conversely, a society where individuals are constantly being told what to do and how to live, even if it's in the name of their own good, that can be equally restrictive.
Yeah. This conversation has really honestly challenged me to think more deeply about how these concepts actually play out in the real world. It's not just about abstract philosophical debates.
Right.
It's about the choices we make every day, both as individuals and as a society.
I agree. And I think the more we understand these different conceptions of liberty, the more equipped we are to have those conversations, to make those choices, and maybe even nudge the world in a more just and fulfilling direction.
It feels like we've been given this incredible map to navigate the complex terrain of freedom. And while there might not be one right path, just having the map makes the journey so much more meaningful.
I couldn't have put it better myself. It's been a real pleasure diving into this topic with you.
Likewise. And with you, our amazing listeners. We hope this deep dive has sparked some thought-provoking conversations for you as well. As always, stay curious, keep exploring, and remember, the quest for true liberty is an ongoing journey, not a destination.